I didn't know what leukemia was. I didn't realize it was a blood disorder. I didn't know anything. They gave her a blood transfusion immediately to keep her alive. She could be dead in 2 hours.
I never thought about dying of leukemia or the cancer. I just flopped. I went to run and my legs completely collapsed.
She went back to school and she just wanted to be a normal kid at school. Right. So bad.
Because people had called me Baldy through all those years. I was called Cancer Kid if I stepped out my front door.
Now the chances of a match is 1 in 100,000.
I just began to want to quit. I wanted that, you guys don't know, but I'd already written suicidal notes of where I wanted my stuff, who to go to.
Every 6 minutes she was able to give herself a shot of morphine.
I did not have the same relationship with my friends. Like, they said, you're different.
We have found a match.
We want to begin the interview this evening by simply saying that every one of us have experienced in our lives what we might call difficulties, hard times, but once in a while we encounter someone that's gone through a trial, or that has their experience eclipses ours completely. And we are humbled, we're silenced when we encounter such an experience. And generally we find that these kind of circumstances, these experiences in a person's life, molds them into the character of Jesus Christ. We have a rare privilege this evening to share in the lives of Brother Kim, Sister Hetty, and Beth Dingwall. And I would like you to welcome them as my guests this evening, as well as their 3 other children. There's Sarah, Hannah, and Ben. Would you like to welcome them for us? I think we could say that the Dingwall family is a devoted, godly Christian family. Probably a normal family. It was when Beth was 8 years old that their lives were to be shattered with the news that she had leukemia. A tender age of 8 and a dreadful disease which was to continue on for 6 long years. And I would like, first, Brother Kim, if you could tell us how this was discovered and how it was diagnosed, and secondly, what went through your mind at that time.
Well, as Brother Ed said, she was an 8-year-old little girl, and she was a very little girl at the time. Our other kids had been sick. They had strep throat. And so then Beth got sick. We thought, well, she's got strep throat too, so we took her to the same doctor, and he gave her the cookie cutter prescription, the same prescription, and said, go home and she'll get over this in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, she hadn't got over it. Beth was, the only symptoms that we saw, Beth was tired, she was pale, she didn't have a lot of energy. That happens lots when you have kids, you're used to that happening. So her teacher suggested we should take her back to the doctor. after 2 weeks. We took her back to the doctor. HEDDY took her to the doctor, and the doctor took one look at her and realized there was something more serious going on. So they suggested that Beth should go to the university hospital for blood tests. Because I'm sitting with a group of Christians here, I think you'll all understand when I say certain things that would seem peculiar to other people in the world. But when HEDDY called me at work and asked me if I would take Beth to the hospital, I said, well, what's going on? They said they want to do some blood work. And when HEDDY said that to me, there was a small voice, not an audible voice, but just that thing on the inside said to me, when you get there, they'll tell you she's got leukemia. Now, I didn't know what leukemia was. I didn't know that leukemia was related to blood, but that was the reasoning that came to me. So I went and picked up Beth, took Beth to the hospital, to the university hospital. The doctors began doing a number of tests to ascertain what the situation was. They had their suspicions. They did some blood tests. They did a bone marrow test to find out what was going on in her bone marrow. And they came back to the room fairly grave. And I said, well, what have you found? And they said, well, we really don't want to say, you know, these things are serious and we don't want to alarm you till we know for sure. And I said, are you looking for leukemia? And they said, well, why would you ask that? I said, I don't know. He said, yes, that's what we found. As you know, that's a fairly devastating thing. I asked them, what are the symptoms? You know, what is the situation? And I brought with me here tonight a number of doctors' reports. And I just wanted to read a few things off this first doctor's report, which was the doctor's report the first time we went to the hospital. They told us that Beth's hemoglobin, which is your red blood cell count, was at 3.5. And to explain that to you, for the average person, your red blood count, which your red blood carries the oxygen to your brain, should be about 12 to 13. When you've heard of people that are anemic and have anemia, they would maybe have a level of about 8. And when you have a level about 8, then they'll go ahead and do a blood transfusion to pick you up. In Beth's case, at 3.4, the doctors told us it was the first time that they had taken a hemoglobin less than 4 on a live person. That anything less than 4, you shouldn't be alive. Further, their test revealed that, and it's here in the doctor's report, 97% of the cells in her bone marrow were cancer. And a full 56% of all the cells in her bloodstream at that point were cancerous as well. With the hemoglobin where it was and the cancer advanced to where it was, they couldn't understand why she was still alive. She had a heart rate of about 185, extremely high for a young child, which the high blood pressure and everything with it. So, like I say, they were having a hard time understanding actually why she was alive. They immediately did a blood transfusion and whatnot. Now, when you take your daughter to a doctor thinking she's got strep throat, and as part of the diagnosis, they turned around and said, you know, that her condition, she might have days or weeks to live. It's fairly devastating. There are some of you sitting in a room here who knew Beth as that little girl. Sweet, wonderful, wonderful girl. Almost every doctor's report that was ever done through the entire thing, they said, what a sweet girl, what a wonderful personality. Every doctor that ever examined her wrote in their reports and testified of her character. And so to have that happen is a fairly devastating thing.
What went through your mind, Beth? Did you have any understanding as a young girl, 8 years old, other than the tests? What kind of test did they start to do? You had a blood transfusion. And this was the beginning, I understand, of the first 6 months. Mm-hmm. Did you have any thoughts of what was happening?
Not really. I just didn't know what was going on. I mean, I got there and our family was pretty close, so I did anyway. I just completely trusted my mom and dad, and they told me it's going to be all right, so it's going to be all right. I knew that I got needles and stuff like that, but I didn't understand leukemia or anything like that. I just thought, well, I'll be here a couple more days and I'll be out. It never once dawned on my mind that you're going to die, and they never dawned, you're only going to have 2 weeks to live. And I know that I'd seen my mom cry sometimes in the washroom, and I just say, "It's going to be okay, Mom." It never dawned on me at all.
Do they recommend treatment right away, or because I know that with your faith and the saints and the church, that your immediate reaction, I believe, was one where you're going to trust God and.
Yeah, that was the immediate reaction. Was, you know, okay, we're gonna pray for Beth. We'd seen sick people healed. We believed in it. I didn't have a lot of confidence in the medical side. I had a brother who died within that same year of cancer, who had been on chemotherapy. I had a brother at the same time in the same hospital dying on chemotherapy with cancer. So I didn't have a lot of confidence in it. And I told the doctor that, I said, I don't have a lot of confidence in this, so, you know, and we're Christian people, so we're going to take her home and pray, and we're going to believe God for her, that he's going to heal her. At that point, he said, well, that's fine and well that you'd feel that way. However, she's a minor, and if you won't submit her to chemotherapy, we'll just get a court order and take her away from you. We're just going to go ahead and do that anyway. So I made a deal with the doctor, you know, that we would take her home, and I would bring her back in 4 or 5 days. I would bring her back, and if there was no difference in her condition, then we would submit to the chemotherapy.
Is this 4 or 5 days from the time you discovered it?
Yes, from that first appointment at the hospital. They wanted to start her right immediately. Of course, they gave her the blood transfusion immediately because she was barely alive. They had to give her the transfusion to bring her heart rate down and keep her alive. So we went away, and a number of churches were praying. A number of people were praying. A lot of individuals came by, and of course, at that time, you know, you're just hunkered down as the dad, and unfortunately having to have that responsibility of making that decision. You're listening very carefully for the Lord. Somebody's coming and saying, well, there's a treatment in Mexico, and somebody's saying, well, there's this thing over here, and every one of them you have to listen to and say, is that God speaking to me, you know? Nothing came, absolutely nothing. I heard nothing from the Lord, and I knew that the nothing, I didn't know why, but I knew the nothing meant that we had to walk through this valley. I knew it would be a long valley. They had explained to us. It was 3 years of very, very intensive chemotherapy, and by the fact that I hadn't had an answer, when we went back to the hospital with Beth, I went back there knowing that we had a valley to walk through.
Was this the beginning of the 6 months now?
Yes. Yes.
Were you in the hospital for 6 months straight?
Probably pretty much.
Okay, can you describe some of that for us?
I don't remember too much about the first couple weeks because I was mostly out, but they did a lot of tests and stuff like that. It said in my record that I think it took, 2, maybe 3 months to get me into remission. So most of those months that you're just on heavy chemo and you're kind of in your own little world. You can't really eat. Everything stinks like rotten eggs. For me, it was. Everything looked and tasted like rotten eggs. I mostly just sat outside the window, chomping on crushed ice and waiting to see my dad cross the crosswalk. And he waved like that up to me, and then I knew he was coming up. That was for pretty much the first couple 6 months that I remember.
Did they do some of those tests? You had described some tests to me, and I didn't know if that was in the first 6 months.
Oh, yeah. Those ones are done probably pretty much throughout the whole time, but more during the 6 months. One of them was the lumbar puncture, short for LP, we always called it. And what you do, the nurse has you curl up in a little tiny ball like this, and she wraps her one arm around your legs and the other one right over your back. So you're kind of in a curved circle, and your spine is like this.
Can you describe that for us? How do they bend you over?
You're like this, curled in a little ball, and she holds you right like this over so you don't jerk up, and your spine is like this when you're sitting straight. When you're curled, it opens, and then they can get through into your spinal cord and get that fluid out. Well, when you're like that, you're open, and they stick.
So they're injecting a needle now?
Yeah. They inject it through here, and they take the fluid out. And if you cough or if you breathe too hard, you can feel that needle slide in and slide right back out. If you sit up straight, it will close onto the needle, and they cannot get it out. That's why you have to stay in a completely curled position and keep these bones open. And then whatever they take...
So it's critical that you don't move.
No. If he were to go in and hit a nerve hard enough, he could completely paralyze you. for the rest of your life.
And one time you
Yep.
thought that did happen, didn't you?
Yep, he had gone in, and that whole day wasn't going very well. I was jittery, I was shaky, I was tense, I couldn't calm down. It was just a total not good day, and he'd stuck the needle in, and I immediately screamed because right from my waist down, just the one leg went completely, like when you hit your elbow, it goes to sleep, and I couldn't move it. I said, I can't move my leg, I can't move my leg. And he said, just a minute, it's okay. And I started freaking out. My leg, I can't feel my leg. And my mom's trying to soothe me, and the nurse, and she's holding me. And then he came in, he says, it's okay. And then later on it subsided, and then he did the test again, and it was okay. And then afterwards he told me, he said, if I would have hit that nerve hard enough, I would have paralyzed you. And I was like, thanks for telling me. I really wanted to know that.
Sister Hetty, what was it like to sit by her bedside? You were sitting there through most of this, weren't you? Holding her hand, giving her strength. I'm sure it was a strength for you, Beth, to have your mom there all the time.
Yeah, totally.
Was she there most of the time?
If my mom wasn't there, then I would refuse to talk to any of the nurses. Anyone would walk in the room.
But this wasn't a week. This wasn't a month. How did you sort out your family? You've got 3 other children. Or did you have the others at this time?
Yeah, we had the 3 other children. Beth was 8, so you know our family's close. So Beth was 8. The next one would have been 7, 6, and 4, and hadn't started school yet. So
how did you manage your schedule? Tell us about that.
no, it was a full schedule. Hetty would stay overnight in the hospital with Beth. So I would get up in the morning, get the kids off to school, get their breakfast. That was a little bit of a trial for them in the beginning, but they got over it after a while. Of course, breakfast was all right because, you know, cornflakes and milk is not hard to do. But basically, we did breakfast, got them off to school. I'd come home from work at lunch, meet them and have lunch with them, and then meet them at the end of the day at about 4 o'clock when they came home from school. I would take the kids, we'd go up to the hospital, and we got about a half hour of family time together at the hospital. Then I would stay at the hospital, and Hetty would go home and for the evening and do laundry and read to the kids and spend time with the other kids in the evening. And then Hetty would come back about midnight and then sleep right over. Hetty slept in a chair right beside Beth overnight. You know, this went on for months, and that was the schedule, you know. It's
almost became a way of life.
Yeah, and it's especially for a sister who's a believer in this message. Her home is her castle. Hetty's very much been that way, and you know, if you get Hetty away from home too long, it's not a good situation. That's where Hetty wants to be, and so it puts a lot of strain on the family. Besides the fact that you know, when Beth tells the story, Beth's not a complainer. Mm-hmm. If she described that lumbar puncture in detail, you know, they would curl her up and put 2 rotund nurses on top of her to hold her so that she couldn't move at all, and say, now this isn't going to hurt. You know, well, you know, I don't believe this, you know. To see your little girl, 8 years old, curled up, and then they would put that in such a shrilling scream, the pain of this thing happening, that it as parents,
it must tear your heart.
It was
right
unbearable
out.
to sit there and listen to it. And I remember the one time she was going in for one of these lumbar punctures, and it just shows that, you know, Brother Branham talks about, you know, the boy that's flying the kite, and every now and then he feels a tug, you know.
Right.
And that's kind of the way we were throughout this whole trial. Every now and then you'd feel a tug. God would do something so supernatural that you knew he was there. You knew he was in control of the situation. And this one time she was going in for one of these lumbar punctures, and Hetty and I were praying before she went in. I'm not sure if it was Hetty or if it was me, but one of us in prayer, as a figure of speech, said, Lord, let it be that she wouldn't even feel this thing when it happens. Mm. So she went in for the lumbar puncture, the same thing. They curl her up and they take this needle and shove it right into the spine. Beth never flinched, she never moved, she never gasped, nothing. The doctor reached over right away and pinched her leg and said, can you feel that? Because he thought the fact that she didn't scream, he must have hit the nerve and paralyzed her, the fact that she wasn't feeling it. It would be nice to be able to sit here and say that's what Beth got every time she went through. That was the only time it happened like that. Every other time she took it like any other person, and went through the pain of actually taking
And this was about every 2 weeks during this initial months.
During the 6 months, yeah.
During the 6 months, every 2 weeks for this lumbar puncture. And they were determining the cancer cells.
With leukemia, one thing that they have found is that if they don't treat, the fluid that's in your spine goes up into your brain, that's all part of the same system. And they have found that if they don't treat that area, that in over 50% of the cases, the cancer will move into that area. So it was done as a preventative thing and as a test to make sure the cancer hadn't moved into that area.
And we all understand that there's different kinds of cancer. And Beth was diagnosed with Philadelphia positive. Tell us something about that, Kim. You're well versed with it.
Well, as an understanding, so that you can understand what leukemia is cancer in your blood system. Your bone marrow is made up of a thing called stem cells, and that's your blood factory. That's where your blood is made. So your red cells, as we said, carry oxygen to the brain. Your white cells are primarily used to fight off disease and whatnot. So what happens is, as your red cells get depleted, they get expelled through your system and they get worn out, they need to be replaced. So your body tells your bone marrow it's time to make more red cells. What happens in a leukemia case is that stem cell, instead of, one of those stem cells becomes corrupt. And instead of producing a red blood cell, it produces a white blood cell, an immature white blood cell that has no useful function in the body whatsoever. All it does is eat. And so, because your body hasn't produced more red cells, it says, make more red cells. And it just continues to make these immature white cells until eventually it just packs out the whole bone marrow with these immature white cells. And that is the blast cells. That's what Beth was 97% full of when she first went to the doctor.
97%.
Now the doctors told us, and I did some research on the internet from the CancerNet now and the American Cancer Society. Anybody that reports with regular ALL that has more than 25% blast cells has a very slim chance of recovery. Beth had 97%. As well, they said if there is cancer cells in the peripheral blood, just in the bloodstream itself, if there's any trace of that at all, again, a very slim chance of survival. Beth's was 56% cancer cells in her bloodstream. And then further down, they did some research and they found out that what she had was what was called Philadelphia positive, which is where you're cross-wired in two chromosomes. Number 9 and 22 get cross-wired and then they don't produce properly. And it's just basically a ticking time bomb in your life. Beth came up to 8 years old with absolutely nothing, and one of these cross-wired cells blew up and caused the whole situation. I have a thing here from the American Cancer Society.
Well, I hope it's the one you want to refer to, where the doctors report a rate of, they actually give 0 hope.
Yeah.
0%.
They said that in the 419 children lacking the T9:22, in other words, that cross-wired one, that there was a 0% chance of survival. Now,
but because of Beth, they had to make a little different adjustment to their figures.
Because of Beth, because every child that has these type of cancers is registered with the Pediatric Oncology Group, POG. It's an international group. One of Beth's doctors happened to be the president of that group, and he took Beth's situation. Of course, we're way ahead, but I think you can see that Beth's doing all right. They now have, in this document, it says the chances of survival is 0.001%. This is the 0.001%. She is the...
Praise the Lord.
.001% means 1 in 100,000 people would survive this disease, and there's been less than 10,000 known cases in the world. So they just picked a number and said, well, there is a slim chance that you might survive because we know of one person that did.
Besides the physical What about the emotional? Could you touch on that? The emotional, the mental strain. I'm thinking just of this first 6 months. You've had the initial shock. You've tried to cope with it. No, God's going to heal her. Our faith is in God. When was it? Was it during this period that, Brother Kim, that God spoke to you once and said He's said something very, very deep inside?
Yeah, there was a number of times when you're going through a trial. You know, I'd like to be able to be the type of person that could sit here and say I'm a very spiritual man and I went through this thing with great faith in God and everything was wonderful. And everything was wonderful in our home because Hetty and I are Christians. We understood everything and we got along fine through the whole thing and we didn't go through what the world goes through. That's not the case. You know, there was times when it was so difficult as a father. You know, men have a tendency to, you know, when there's something wrong and they're starting to understand this might be a genetic thing, you know, then there's all the denial things and all the things that men go through. Well, what's wrong with me that I didn't have a proper offspring and all these things that you have to deal with. And Beth may touch on it a little later when it comes to the whole thing with psychiatrists and psychologists and all these things. But when you're first admitted, they give you a whole team of these people to work with because there are very few families that actually cope, you know, with this big, dark, long valley. There was at one point when the trial of the thing was so difficult. We were sitting in a service, Hetty and I were, and we didn't always get to go to church, you know, because oftentimes we were at the hospital, and then when you went to church, sometimes your mind was just in a daze from everything you were going through. But we were sitting in church, and because of the stress of the thing, Hetty and I hadn't been speaking all day. We hadn't been on talking terms. You know, I'm not proud to say it, but it's... And I was sitting in the back of the church. The service had ended, and what struck me was all the resources of heaven are here. The people that love you are here. The believers are here. There isn't a one of these people that wouldn't stand for you. And what struck me was all the resources of heaven are here. What excuse would you have for failure? What excuse is there? And so I took Hetty by the hand, and we walked up to the front, and I told our pastor, I said, you know, we're not coping with this very well. We need some help. Now, those of you that know Hetty and I, both Hetty and I are considered to be very strong people in ourselves. But strong doesn't mean that you can't be broken.
Right.
It just means you go farther before you're broken. You know, and you can be taken far enough. And we were in this taken far enough where we couldn't cope with this anymore. You know. And so we put it in the Lord's hands. We went up for prayer, and it completely broke at that time. Completely broke. And you just felt that strength. Different ones that all throughout, you know, we were interfacing with different people that were going through the same kinds of things, and they continually told us, where do you have such strength? How can you go through this? Where is this coming from? And of course, it was always an opportunity to tell them of the hope that lied within.
Sister Beth, you were taken to the hospital, I remember you telling me, and you were taken into a ward, and there was a number of children there, and some of them, or perhaps all of them, they didn't have their hair, and describe that, because I know it was during this time that you had a lot of deep thoughts about that.
My parents never did tell me that I had leukemia or cancer till probably maybe like quite when I was more finished, like near that more end of it. And I was well enough that they put me into a room with another girl, and when I was going out, I noticed that most of the kids on this ward were bald, and I had hair. And we'd gone into this other room, and we sat on the bed, and the mother just said loud, without, obviously, she said, "She's going to lose her hair, you know that, right?" And
Who was it said that?
it was the other girl's mom in there.
Okay.
The girl had cancer in her nose, and she was on chemo and also had no hair, and she just looked straight at my mom and said, "She's going to lose her hair, you know that, right?" And I looked at my mom and I began to cry, because all you're growing up in the message as a little girl, you don't do anything to your hair. You don't cut it, you You just want it long, and it's your glory. So I started crying. My mom really comforted me. It's okay. It's gonna be all right, you know. And but then I knew I was going to lose it. It was just something inside me. I knew I was going to lose it. And when I did, me and my mom had prayed, and we'd asked God, I still want my curly hair, and I still want my same color. And to this day, I have the same color, and it's still curly. And normally, if you're on chemo, it comes in normally the exact opposite of what they got. They don't know why, it just would come in the opposite, because it completely...
Come in any other color?
Yeah, and straight, curly.
Come in black, come in blonde.
Yeah, and mine
Great,
came,
like
yeah.
mine.
Yeah. And mine always, I lost my hair probably 4 or 5 times completely bald. And every time it came in that same color and curly.
So you'd lose it, it would come back, and you'd lose it again. What did you think about, you know, when you saw all the others that were bald, and did you think that I'm not going to lose it?
No, that day when that lady had said to my mom, do you know she's going to lose her hair? Even though it hurt me a lot, like, because this was my hair. You know, anywhere you go on the street, you go on the mall, no one in the mall is bald but you. And everywhere you go, the only place where you're bald is on that little ward there. And so even though I didn't know, I knew that when I prayed that, and I asked God to give me the same color and curly, I just knew that He'd give me that. And my parents, during that time, when I got a pass out, they decided to get me a wig. And I hated that thing. It was ugly, it was itchy, and it was heavy. It was just so...
Before we get to the wig, because there's some interesting stories about the wig, and you had more than one wig.
No, I just had one, but I had tons of hats, yeah.
Oh, but you had, what was it like when you first started to comb your hair and the hair began to come out? You know, I know that had a deep, emotional reaction upon you.
When after a couple days after, that lady had said that they'd put me on heavy chemo, and my mom would go to brush my hair, and as she'd brush here, the chunk would come out here, and another one there, and my mom, being creative, she'd just do a French braid and cover up all these bald spots and to make me feel better, and different things just to cover it up. And
mothers are that way. They can
we get big,
improvise.
Huge, get big, huge breasts, you know, just to kind of fix it all up.
The breasts just got bigger?
Yeah.
What did you do with your hair?
Because to this day it's still kept in a little bag.
Well, I think that's wonderful. I heard a little story about some young people who were in visiting you, and they were wanting to comfort you and so on, but you were cheering them up. Do you remember that? I'm sure you were visited many, many times.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's a story that I remember. And you were bald, you didn't have any hair at that time. And the young people were there trying to say some comforting words to you and so on. And then when they walked out of the room, you reached over, and your dad was with you. And you reached over and picked up that plastic bag, I believe it was, and you'd saved your hair in it. And you held that, and of course, you couldn't stop the tears then. But you'd been cheery to everyone else, and when they were all gone, then the reality was all back, and you had to have a little cry at that time. But I think that was wonderful, and God saw that. God saw you hanging onto that bag with your hair, and I believe that's why He gave you your original color and original curly hair back again. But now that was the 6 months, and then following that, or after 6 months, there was a time of remission. Perhaps you could fill us in that time, Brother Kim.
Well, basically then, very heavy, intensive chemotherapy to get her into remission, which is a matter of beating down the cancer cells and getting the cancer so it's not multiplying.
Now, can I just interrupt? during the time of this remission, did you have your hair, was it growing back, or did you remain bald? All during that time?
Yeah.
And that was about 3.5 years, wasn't it?
Oh, it depended. Once you're in the remission, you don't have as heavy dose. Like you'll go through periods where it's to keep you in remission, so you'll just go on smaller doses and your hair will grow in to maybe about here, and then they'll give you a more heavy dose, and then you'll lose it all again, and then they'll let it grow in again, and you'll just get, and then they'll give you another heavy dose, and then it will.
So did you wear your wig all during this time?
Only to church.
Tell us about the time in church when you kind of surprised a little fellow.
There's 2 stories about that wig. Probably that around the same time I got a pass and we were going to church and I was doing fine. And that thing was so itchy, it made your head look about this small and your head, the rest of your hair about like that. It was just so thick. And it was very heavy, very thick, and it would keep on falling back. And so I just grabbed the bangs and kind of yank it forward, and then go on. And then in church, it would sometimes get a little hot, so I just take the back, put it back, scratch my head, and pull it forward. I mean, you're sitting at the back row, not everyone's going to turn around and go like that, right? So this little boy was sitting...
A little boy was sitting beside you.
Yeah, he was sitting more over on the side, and it happened, my scalp happened to be itchy, and I pulled it back, scratched it, and pulled it forward, and I looked over, and he looked at his mom, he kind of scratched his head, he stared at me, and he stared at me for the rest of the service. He followed me around. How come my scalp doesn't do that?
He was trying to figure out why he couldn't do it. You were really unique with him from that time.
Probably the same time I'd come out of the church and I was talking to a couple of friends outside, and my brother was in the van. And, I'm talking there very cheerfully, hoping it's all straight, and that kind of thing. And there's about a bunch of us girls, And my brother happened to be falling out of the van, and the only thing handy to grab was my wig. And there I'm standing with no wig. Just a bald head, I pick it up, stick it on, everything's fine.
How did you cope with those embarrassments? Was it embarrassing for you, or?
Well, because you're in and out of the hospital with a bunch of kids that are bald, you all get over. I mean, after a while, you just kind of like having a bald head. You just get up in the morning, look at your head, it's bald. Take a washcloth, wipe it off, and go have fun.
I've heard brothers say that before, but never a sister.
So now we have the 3.5 years of remission, and during that time, visits to the hospital on a regular basis.
On a regular basis. Beth was in a situation where if there was any kind of a fever or anything like that, there was so many things going on inside her with drugs and whatnot that she had to be rushed right away. There's a couple things. One of the other treatments, that we haven't discussed that they had to do with Beth on a regular basis was a bone marrow tap, where they would go right into the bone marrow to actually find out what was going on in the bone marrow. Absolutely excruciating. What they would do, for those of you you guys that know about screws and things, they take about a number 8 or about a 3/16 screw and screw that right through the flesh and into the bone.
Well, first, when you're first getting it, it's like an all-day. When you go to the hospital, they tell you you're going to have a bone marrow test today. It's the entire day, because first you have to get your tests, and if your tests are good, then you go on with it. Then the first thing they'll do is they'll put on this cream which freezes your skin, the first couple layers of your skin. When that's completely frozen, then they'll stick a needle in and start freezing your flesh. And then
in stages?
Yeah, in little stages, very slowly, so that they can finally get to the bone as close as possible. But around your bone is covered all in nerves, and you cannot freeze nerves at all. And this is another one where you're wrapped up by nurses even more tighter than the lumbar puncture. This one, you're almost as soon as the needle will hit the nerves, you'll almost want to jerk up straight, and you already just scream, because the pain of the freezing and the nerves just completely clash, and you can't help it but scream. And you're just, it's not an easy test to go through, and at about this time he'll stick a little more freezing, and at the same time he'll go in and do the drill right into the bone, and you'll start injecting out the fluid that's inside your bones and that kind of stuff. And they have a nurse right there, a lab technician, who will take the sample right away. And in this test, you cannot be sleeping. You can only be slightly drowsy, because if you are sleeping, the tests come out hazy. They're not true, so in which you'd have to do it all over again. So you have to...
So you have to be fully awake and alert, really.
It's kind of like almost a joke that the doctors and kids have. The louder you scream, they know that that's the better it is. It's kind of not a very good thing, but they know that the better it'll be.
Yeah,
God must have spared you and given you extra strength at that time.
Yeah, when you look and you know, Beth's sitting here today, she's 18 years old, and you can't hardly imagine doing this to somebody like Beth. But now think she was 8 years old. You know, pick in your mind an 8-year-old.
Was she still 8 when she had this?
She was still 8 years old when she was going through this. And she continued with this treatment then, and bone marrow and spinal taps and intensive chemotherapy. They put so many intravenous needles into her hands and her arms that after a while her veins were all collapsed like a junkie. They would sometimes take half an hour to 3/4 of an hour of poking and prodding and trying to get needles in. Now, at that time of your life, when you're 8 to 11 years old, your biggest challenge in life shouldn't be having to deal with these things. You know, you asked some of the emotional things. Beth started this treatment with some other kids, and then she'd laying in a bed next to a child, and that next morning the child wasn't there and the child wasn't discharged.
Right.
And having to deal with, getting to know these kids, and then you're a little bit friends, and then you're praying for these kids, and you know the family, and all of those things.
Were you aware, Beth, that they were dying?
You do know, but you don't say.
You just didn't want to admit it, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of something that you say.
You don't talk about.
Yeah, you don't talk about it. You know where that kid is, and you say to yourself, well, they're in a better place. And especially when you're behind them, you're just wondering yourself, okay, I'm at the same stage there, and they're not here anymore. What about me? So then you get where they were, and you're living, and then you get a little bit further, and then a person that's there, they're not there no more. So for me, I was kind of more at the head stage of everyone, kind of waiting, okay, I'm here. Where's everyone else? You know, just kind of waiting your own little thing, yet you know they're dead, and you know they're not coming back, and you just say to yourself, they're at a better place, and you don't talk about it to other people. Like
your mom and dad read scripture to you. I know they prayed with you. And was that a source of comfort to you?
Yeah. Before each time, I always had problems sleeping in hospitals. I just could never sleep. And always my mom, before we'd go, she'd always read a scripture to me, and then she'd pray, and then she'd leave. And that was probably about the only thing that actually ever got me rested enough that I could have a couple hours sleep. Mm-hmm. But if that wouldn't happen, then I wouldn't sleep that entire night.
During the time of remission, you had some dreams that I thought are very, very outstanding. Mm-hmm. And I'd like you to tell us about those dreams and then how it was fulfilled, how it concluded. There was one dream and then one kind of, event kind of thing. The dream went after I got, probably the first year, after I was home more often. This was after I was in remission. Just before I go to sleep, it was probably maybe 5 at the most, a 10-second, just a little clip, and I'd be awake every time this happened. It probably happened quite a bit. How many times?
I don't recall, but it happened quite often. I don't. Just before I go to sleep, I dreamed this little dream. I was not really dreaming because I was awake. I was laying on this green couch, and it was kind of separated into 2 rooms. There was the green couch room, and then there was a little room hallway thing. And my dad was talking to a dark-haired doctor, and the only thing the doctor said to my dad was, "She's got it back," and meaning I'd gotten leukemia back. And that's all the dream was. And
it was the same dream every time?
Yeah, same dream.
And he said the same thing every time?
I was asleep on this green couch.
She's got it back, or it's come back?
And he'd say, "She's got it back." That was Exact same thing every night. I would cry because I didn't want to go through the whole thing all over again. And I'd ignore the dream. I'd ask, God, take this dream away. I wondered why. Why am I getting the same dream over and over before I'm going to sleep? And then, just like the hospital, they'd been in this room with the green couch. There was no green couch.
You got a call. You got a call to bring her in, did you, to the university hospital then?
Mm-hmm. This would be now, we're getting ahead to where now after the 3.5 years, the 3 years of chemotherapy, all that time where they basically give you enough to make sure that the cancer doesn't come back, then they stop the chemotherapy at that point. And in stopping the chemotherapy, then as far as they're concerned, you're finished and you just go on with life. It was about 9 months later, and throughout this entire time, Beth continually had this dream. About 9 months later, Beth's legs started to swell up, and she started to get pain in her legs. And I think at that point, Hetty knew what was going on. I didn't. And Hetty knew what was happening. And so we took her to the hospital. They tested her again, and the results were almost the same as the first time we took her in. Now, this was after 3.5 years of, we went not hours or days or weeks, we went months where we didn't know if we'd have Beth the next day. Mm-hmm. It was that close so many times. Through that 3.5 years, in the doctor's records here, there's countless numbers of times where I would carry this limp little doll into the emergency ward in the middle of the night, just completely limp, fevers of 40 and 41 Celsius, and just take her into the hospital over and over. So we had just gotten through it. There was a little over 3 years of that, and we thought we were all right, and we thought, okay, here it goes. We took her back into the hospital because of the swelling of her knees and whatnot. The doctor's report said that they recognized right away what it was. It was symptomatic of leukemia, and they went ahead and tested her, and they found her in exactly the same condition they did the first time. 97% cancer in her bones, 56% in her blood. Again, her hemoglobin right down where she was barely alive. And, I looked at Hetty and I said, I don't understand, but it looks like we have to walk through this valley again.
And which time that you took her back to the hospital, which time was it when this dream became fulfilled?
Beth could probably tell you that it was this time when we actually took her in.
Yeah, I'd gone in, and there was this one particular Jewish doctor. He was only going to be there.
You had never seen him before?
Yeah, he'd been there before, but he wasn't my doctor. He was just more on just the team.
Okay.
He didn't have really, if he was there, then he was there, but otherwise we didn't have very much contact. He was a Jewish doctor by the name of Dr. Shushani, and he was probably, I'd say, one of the world's greatest doctors. He was so good and so gentle with the kids that many of the major needles, like the lumbar puncture or the bone marrow test, he could do it on a kid and have that kid many times not even let out the screams that they do. And he had done the test on me, and that test was the easiest bone marrow test I've ever done. He was a real doctor. He just knew. He was calm, he was cool. He'd say, do you want to go a little further? And I'd say, yeah, I'm ready. Then he'd go a little closer, and he says, you want me to stop? I'm like, yeah, just stop. And he'd say, more? I'm like, no. And I'd be nervous, and he'd go, just wait, okay. My hands are right here. And he'd put his hands right over where I could see them. He'd right here, and he'd go like this. And he'd rub them, and he'd say, you want to go a little more? I'm like, okay. Because I'm nervous, because I know this scream is going to come. Mm-hmm. And then he'd say, okay, and then he'd push a little more. He's like, more? He's like, yeah, okay. And then he'd go a little more, and then finally, when the test was over, they said that we want you to wait. And I was laying in this room on the green couch, and right outside the door, Dr. Shushani, he had the dark hair like the dream said, and he told my dad that I'd had it back. And I remember waking up, my dad saying it's time to go, and I remember knowing that his eyes were teary-eyed, but not thinking anything of it, just wanting to go home and lay down. I didn't know then.
But when you came into the room,
yeah,
on that time,
yeah,
there was a green sofa there,
yeah,
green couch.
Yep.
Did you sit on it?
I was laying on that green couch,
You were
exactly
laying on that
like
green
in the
couch.
dream.
And that dark-haired doctor came in and said it's come back.
one of the interesting things is when Beth was having that dream, there was no room like that.
No.
From the time she was having that reoccurring dream, the hospital had been renovated, actually twice. And it was after that renovation that they had put that green couch in that room and set that room up exactly as Beth had seen it.
Beth, you had another very interesting experience, and I don't know just how many of our viewers will be able to understand it, but I believe that believers can understand it. Mm-hmm. You became very familiar with everyone's footsteps.
Yes.
You could tell which doctor it was, which nurse it was, mm-hmm. if it was your mother coming, if it was your mm-hmm. father coming. Mm-hmm. You knew exactly the footstep.
Yeah.
And then you were at home, I believe, weren't you?
Yeah.
You were at home, and you'd heard your mother's footsteps. She had left the room. Is that not right?
She had come down to give me some vitamin or give me some of the pills that I was supposed to take. I was on drugs at whatever time of the night, and they had to be taken at whatever time of the night. And she had just gone upstairs, and I heard her feet walking up the stairs, up this way, and then there's another flight up that way. And I know her steps, and she was coming up and just going up these ones, and I heard these other ones coming very, very slowly, yet very distinctly walking down these stairs.
Steps you had not heard before?
No. My mom's, I heard her walk up. She was already up. And I heard these ones. These were not her steps at all. They were steps that immediately was not the presence of my mom either. It was something else. And I just began
What kind of a presence was it?
It was a completely fearful experience where when I heard these footsteps going down those stairs, I already began to sweat, and I began to close up and just stiffen. I knew they were not good steps. They were evil steps. And I heard them coming down, and I felt them going closer, and they were coming down these stairs this way. And then they started walking. There was a hallway right in front of here, and my bed's right here. And they started walking really close, and this grunting, hoarse voice just coming out, just grunting, kind of moaning, saying, I'm going to get you, you're mine.
So you heard that voice
Yes,
audibly?
I did. And I heard the footsteps coming closer and closer, beginning to walk into my room. And my door was always open so that my mom, if she'd hear me scream or want her, she'd just come in. And I saw this thing turn in and stand in my doorway.
You actually saw an object now?
Yes, I did. It was...
Describe that for us.
It was, it wasn't very tall. It had hair it was hunched over kind of like this, and scrawny arms reaching out like this, and it had hair hanging about down to here that was kind of matted and was dark. It covered its eyes. I did not see its eyes. The little skin I did see was very, very dark, and it was reaching out like this. It was wearing very ragged, ripped clothes, and it had scrawny little arms, just bones reaching out, and long hands, extremely long nails, and just kind of reaching over, just shaking like this towards me, walking closer and closer and closer to me. And I felt this thing coming to me, and it all the while saying, you're mine, I'm going to get you, I'm going to get you. And I quickly threw the blankets over my head, and I felt these arms just about to come and just touch me like this, right on me. And I screamed, and my mom came in the room, and she said, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I rebuke you, Satan. That thing just, boom, just left. And I guess my mom said that I'd screamed before that, and that thing was, I can still see that image to this day, that same thing.
How many times did that happen?
That happened twice, but not with the same thing. The other thing, it was kind of an eerie little thing. It wasn't more haunting, it was just, I don't know.
But they're vivid.
Yes, very vivid. I was laying on my parents' floor, and the stairs were just down this way, and I saw this. It wasn't very tall, just more like a little animal kind of thing. And just kind of jumpy and irritating and coming, and it coming, you're going to mind your mind, I'm going to get you, like really high, eerie, I can't even do the voice, coming over, and just before it would be about...
You knew it was evil.
Yes, because...
It had a presence of
yes,
evil.
because when I feel it or see it, I already begin to sweat and shake and not want it, obviously. And just before it would be just about to touch me, my mom would grab me and she'd say, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I rebuke you, Satan. And that thing would leave.
Was this a different reaction, Sister Hetty? Had you seen her act like this before?
No.
No. This was different. Yeah. But every time you prayed and said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ,
She calmed down.
she'd calm down. And for you, it just went poof.
Yeah.
Satan just a bluff.
You know, this morning when the message was being preached and he talked about Shamgar, and there's coming in and taking what was his.
Right.
I thought then of this situation with Hetty. Let a sister who's a believer and let
Yes.
someone come in and try and get a hold of her
Take
flock.
that. You're right. Right.
You've
Take
got
that
you've got the full fury of God. As she called out on the Lord.
I would like to come to the time now where it was determined that Beth must have a bone marrow transplant.
What happened, we went back in, of course. Beth, as we said, Beth had had a total relapse. They went ahead and put her on chemotherapy and said that, by this time they were able to determine that it was Philadelphia positive and that there was a chromosomal problem that would not be cured in any other way but a bone marrow transplant. She had to have a bone marrow transplant to live. So they wanted to do a related transplant. So, many of you have probably read of different times where, someone has a child who needs bone marrow, so they go ahead and have another child in hopes that it's going to match and all that. And we thought we were all right because we had 3 other kids already. So we went ahead and Hetty and I and the kids, we were all tested to find out, and we thought it was going to be all right. We've got 3 other kids, we'll have a match and things will be fine. They tested us all and none of us matched with Beth. Beth had a different bone marrow. None of us matched. It didn't work. So at that point then they said, well, we're going to have to go for an unrelated donor and find an unrelated donor.
And this can take a long time, I understand.
This can take a long time. The chances of a match, not a donor, but a match is 1 in 100,000. There are, for every 100,000 people in this world, you have to have 200,000 people to have 2 the same.
And there's nothing saying that person is at all willing or interested.
Right, or how do you find this needle in a haystack? Unless the person happens to be registered in a bone marrow registry, you'd never find them. So the person would have to be registered in a bone marrow registry, and then we'd have to find the person, and then is the person healthy, and is the person willing, and all of the rest of that. And it was January when Beth was first diagnosed to say that she had it back and we needed to do this. By the time they processed all of us, it was into February. Now, they let us know that it can take, sometimes it's a couple of months, it can take years to find a donor. But because of the rigorous chemotherapy that Beth had just come off of, less than a year prior to that, her body was not in a state where they could hold her in a suspended situation for a long time. They told us they could only keep her in remission for a few months because her body wouldn't be able to tolerate those high doses of chemotherapy to keep her there. So on the one hand, they're saying we can keep her in remission for a couple of months. On the other hand, they're saying it's going to take several months to years to actually find a donor.
So to find a donor would be a miracle in itself.
Very much so.
And as remote as that seemed, God had prepared a donor 5,000 miles away to the far east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, a generous heart, a wonderful person by the name of Davina Davis. And we have Davina Davis on the telephone. I would like to greet you, Davina, from Cloverdale BibleWay, where this broadcast is taking place and this video is being made. And we would like you to be able to greet your recipient, Beth.
Greetings, Beth.
Hi, Davina.
Hi, Beth. Greetings to all of you in the name of Jesus Christ.
Thank you.
How you
Greetings to
doing?
you.
Thank you. I'm fine. And you're fine, too?
Yeah.
Good.
I'll send you the video and you'll get to see me here.
Great. Good. I'm looking forward to it.
Can you relate to us, Davina, what led up to you signing on the register to give bone marrow to someone?
Well, I have been a blood donor for almost all my adult life. And then I switched over to being a plasma donor. And I think someone told me about bone marrow, the bone marrow registry, and I saw a notice about it, so I signed up. And never expected, just as you've said, 1 in 100,000, I never expected to be contacted. And I think maybe I was on the list for 6 or 7 months, and that was all. And then I got this call.
After you got the call, then you had to journey from Newfoundland to Halifax, I understand, more than once.
Yeah, I had to go twice. There were a lot of tests, because each time you would have to be tested, and you'd say to yourself, am I going to be a match or am I not? And they kept saying, of course, you know, you can back out if you need to and all this stuff, and I never had any intention of backing out. So I had a lot of tests in St. John's, and I must say everybody was really very nice. All the hospitals were good. And then I had to come to Halifax once for some more tests and meet the doctor and all that. And then I came to give the transplant. It was really, it was made as easy as it could be.
But you were not permitted to know who the recipient would be.
No, I wasn't. I had, a few hints were dropped, but not, of course, of a name. But I did know that it was a young person and that they didn't live near me. But that's about all.
So how did, Beth, did you initiate trying to find Davina?
Well, in the transplant, you have to sign a contract that you do not ask no questions. You do nothing to try to contact the donor within the year. So when the year was up, the nurse called and said, we can't find your donor. And I said, then find her, I don't care. She's saved my life, go find her. So about maybe a couple months later, they called back and they said, we found your donor and she's gonna call, and so get ready. So the only hint they'd ever give me is they said, because she has given so much and is so healthy that it could be a guy. So I'm like, oh my God, okay. So it was me and Stephanie and Susanna, they were there with me, and we started writing a letter, kind of a note for a guy. So here we are, you know, kind of thinking guy questions and that kind of thing. And then she calls and then she says, hi. And I'm like, doesn't sound like a guy. And then I said, so I asked, I'm like, are you a girl or guy? She says, I'm a girl. And I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So I'm like, how old are you? She's like, I'm 39. I'm like, oh, you don't have someone that old. How old are you? I'm like, hi. So after that, I was like completely blank the entire time. Here's my note, not how it's supposed to go, and then here's my donor. So that pretty much the entire time, I didn't have a clue what to say, so she just kind of took over the conversation and made me feel completely comfortable.
Probably good thing she did take it over.
Yeah.
Now I know why that was such a funny conversation.
And then it was about 4 years, thereabouts, about 3 to 4 years later, that you were able to actually meet.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they came to Halifax. I was living in Halifax by this time.
Yeah, and
Beth and her family came to visit. So we had a nice lunch together and got to know each other.
What was it like when you first met each other? What went through your minds when you met?
my dad had gone out because we were a little confused at times, and so he'd gone out and said, I think she's here. So I got all ready and I waited, and she walked in the room. I looked at her, she looked at me, and I knew when I was going to see her, I was going to give her these flowers, give her a hug, and lead her to our table. And we just looked at each other. I'm like, so stunned. And so finally she gives me a hug, and I'm like, oh, duh, I was going to do that. So finally I gave her a hug, and I had to write my own card because there are no such cards as a donor card. So.
Right.
Thanks for the bone marrow.
Well, Davina, we wanted to have this moment with you and Beth. We are indebted to you because you've given us really a wonderful joy in the life of Beth Dingwall. And so there's quite a group of people, several hundred here tonight. And if you'd accept our thanksgiving and our appreciation by way of a good hand clap, we would be thankful if you'd just receive it from our hearts.
Thank you very much.
We say God bless you.
And God bless you too.
Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, Davina.
Bye.
That was a nice moment. We just want to come to the transplant because Sister Beth had a very wonderful experience with the Lord Jesus Christ. And this would be the highlight of this testimony, this interview. And so, I don't know whether it's you, Brother Kim, or you, Sister Beth. Perhaps you could tell us, Brother Kim, the deteriorated condition that she was in, because I doubt if Beth would know the pain and so on, but just tell us how it came about.
A bone marrow transplant is something that you wouldn't want to wish on your worst enemy. In a bone marrow transplant, what is done, they call it a kill and rescue. And they basically kill your life completely. Beth underwent 3 weeks of very intensive chemotherapy and full body irradiation.
Explain that, please, the full body radiation, because
What they would do is put Beth in a large bed and fill this bed up with tapioca bags so that it was like one big solid block.
It's like the size of a kind of a coffin, just kind of long and skinny.
I probably wouldn't have used that word.
Well, that size. If you lay there too long, you'd probably feel that way too.
But in any case, they put her in this nice bed with these bags. And then they would actually go ahead and give her full body radiation, a very, for anybody of you who's technical, I have all the information here, but full body radiation, and the purpose of that was to kill every living cell in her bone marrow and all of her white blood cells, because they were all corrupt. And so the corruption had to be killed before the new life could be put in. Now, full body irradiation has some horrendous side effects. They took Beth before the bone marrow transplant. They measured her heart condition, her lungs, her liver. Every vital organ was tested to have a benchmark so they knew where all of these things were. After the full body radiation, Beth got sores in her mouth. If you've ever had a canker sore or a cold sore, her mouth was one big sore starting on the outside, her lips, the entire inside of her mouth, all the way down her throat was one big sore. All that soft tissue and soft tissue elsewhere on the body was all completely burnt from the radiation. Maybe you could explain to them how you had to eat at that time.
You don't eat during the transplant, but I had canker sores like that during the other time, and I had a sore that covered probably about half the side of my mouth on the outside, and I didn't want to be on one of those tubes where they shove your food down and that's how you eat. I hated those things, so to force myself to eat, I'd take a muffin, take a small piece of it, scrunch it into a tiny little square, shove it in the side of my mouth, kind of press my tongue to the top of my mouth, and then swallow it, and that was how I ate. And
how long?
Delicious.
How long did you have this? How many times? It came back, it reoccurred?
It would come back, many times it would go too out of control and I'd have to be on oxygen and mask, but other times they'd have it enough under control that I'd only get a small one or something like that. But this one was probably the worst. If my dad, he'd always come in and he'd make jokes, and you can't really laugh and this thing will split and break and bleed. So when you laugh, you just kind of take your mouth, and when you're going to laugh, you just kind of hold it like this together. And to talk, you just kind of, hello, how are you doing? Just kind of talk this way so you don't bust it open.
Can you imagine anybody having even a sense of humor after 6 years? And this preparation for the transplant, this whole thing was another 7 weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Another 7 weeks.
7 weeks of very intensive chemotherapy. When you talk about the Beth's sense of humor, they were used to kids coming over. Beth used to go 3 times a day by ambulance from the Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary. Again, the transplant took place in Calgary, so I was at home in Edmonton with the kids through the week, and we came down on the weekends to spend time with Beth. And Beth would go from the Children's Hospital over the Foothills Hospital by ambulance 3 times a day. She had to go by ambulance, full-blown paramedics, everything there, because again, of course, she was barely alive. They were just barely keeping her alive to get her through to the transplant. And so they were used to kids coming over there and not much of a frame of mind. I mean, pretty well just there. And the one time they were busy putting all these there's hundreds of tapioca bags that they put on, and basically they're put on so that you're one big block, so that when they hit you with this radiation, they don't fry your fingers and things.
I think we should have Beth tell that one.
You go ahead.
Well, I mean, on the first, before the radiation, you get 3 huge doses of chemotherapy, and that chemotherapy, as soon as it goes in you, it has 7 minutes to get out, because once it's in there for 7 minutes, your organs begin to just completely shut down. So while that's going in, they stick you on another drug, which you immediately go to the bathroom to try and get it out. And before the transplant, they tell you you cannot eat any fast food place or any restaurant for a whole year. So my dad had taken me to this very nice restaurant in Calgary called China Rose, and we sat for about 15 minutes for the buffet, for the good, fresh buffet, and I had 6 huge plates of food. And I didn't know I was scheduled the next day for chemo, and as you know, 6 plates of food does not digest within 24 hours. And running back and forth into that bathroom, I caught a bowel infection in between the whole time. You have loads and loads of diarrhea. And they know you're not going to make it, so they sit nicely beside you, a full tray or a basket of clean underwear and another one for your dirty underwear.
Sounds it.
And so when you have the radiation and you say, I gotta go to the bathroom, they know you gotta go to the bathroom. So it was all packed nicely, and I said, I gotta go to the bathroom. So they were throwing these things up, and I'm like, just kidding. And then they spat them all out again. And they know you can't eat anything. You're just throwing up, and you throw up so much you're beyond puking the yellow acid up. You're on the clear. You're just beyond everything. And so when they say you've got to puke, you're going to puke. And so they almost pretty much all pack them nicely around your head and that kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm going to barf. So they throw them off again. I'm like, just kidding. And then they stack them all on again.
I don't think they found too many people in that condition that would have a sense of humor.
Well, we've done that when you're in the transplant, so that you're not so concerned about laying in your bed, dying, that kind of thing, and in pain. They give you a school teacher, a lady that you have fun with, a physiotherapist, your psychiatrist. Tuesdays.
You're a psychiatrist. I'm interested in that. You said a little bit. Beth wrote a whole journal, and she was good enough to let me read it. She was a wee bit embarrassed, but she let me have it, and it was a lot of interesting reading. It was a thick book. Her journal is called My Buddy, and it was just incredible how touching some of this was. You know, little things like, Dad will be coming down with the kids this weekend. Hopefully I can get a pass, because if I don't, I think I'll die. It says, Mom played baseball with Sarah and Ben, and oh, if I could just be out there. If only I could get out there. When I finally get to go home, a real home in Beaumont. I don't understand. Oh, Beaumont, is that where you were living? Yeah. That's not Beaumont, Texas. It's Beaumont, Edmonton. Then I can see my friends and be in church and be my old self again. You could see the life of this young girl was still there. It was just striving for expression. And I want to come to a very, very important part of this. Massive doses of radiation, massive doses of chemotherapy. And I want to refer first to a statement that God spoke to you, Brother Kim, when you were in church. And God said something to you that he was not going to take you out of this, but he was going to take you through it.
that was the realization that we had, was that God wasn't going to lift us out of the trial, but that he was going to take us through the trial.
And now we've gone through months and some years, and we're right at the point of having this bone marrow transplant. And this becomes a very, very critical point, because the bone marrow itself, being a tissue, deteriorates very quickly.
Right.
And this is an outstanding moment in this entire experience. And God is coming on the scene. So I want, if you would relate that, Brother Kim.
Okay. Basically, as I said, the bone marrow was a kill and rescue. So at this point, they had killed Beth. Beth had no life whatsoever. All of her stem cells were gone. There was no white blood cells. There was nothing. So at this point then, what they do is they take the bone marrow, and it goes in through a tube into the main artery in her chest here called a Broviac tube, and it just goes into that tube. And this is, when I asked the doctors how this was all done, they said, well, I said, okay, so then how does the bone marrow get in the bones? Well, he said, this is the part we don't understand. He said the bone marrow, because it's bone marrow, it knows it belongs in the bones, and it just goes there and sets up shop and starts making blood.
Exactly what Brother Branham said in the church ages.
Yeah.
The cells will go to that part of the body.
Right. So
and now we're hearing it again.
Yeah, so when that bone marrow was put into your body, as you know, with most tissues, you know, with our Lord, we knew he couldn't be in the grave for more than 3.5 days because of corruption. Corruption would set in. So the bone marrow, when it's put into the body, only lives so long. And so we were told to expect within about 2 to 3 days that we would see that bone marrow would find its place into the bones and start producing cells. Now, I have some charts. We're not going to put them up, but I have some charts that showed Beth's white blood cell count at 0. Her white cell count was at 0. They had killed everything. Her transplant was on Thursday. And we were expecting by Sunday to see a result. And on Thursday, there was nothing. Friday, there was nothing. Saturday was nothing. Sunday, there was nothing. Monday, there was nothing. We're now up to 5 days, and they told Hetty and I we might as well start making funeral arrangements because the bone marrow couldn't survive. This was Monday. Tuesday, there was nothing. What they were doing was giving her blood products to keep her alive. They were, every couple of days, they'd give her a blood transfusion, and then they would give her platelets. And as they charted that, we'd see they gave her blood, and then it would ebb down. They'd give her blood, she'd ebb down. So we're up to Tuesday, there was nothing. Wednesday, there was nothing. Thursday, there was nothing. We were a full week now. Friday, there was nothing. Saturday, nothing. Sunday, nothing. Monday, nothing. By this time, I was already arguing with the doctors because they didn't want to give her any more blood products because they said the girl can't live. She can't live. We can't just keep giving her blood products. I said, you're going to keep giving her blood products. And that was up till Tuesday. And if we looked at her chart, she had 0, 0, 0 every day. There was absolutely no production. The bone marrow had not caught. There was no production of blood cells whatsoever leading up then till Wednesday.
Was this pretty much the lowest moment?
I looked at Beth at that point. I looked at Beth and I looked at her, and the scripture came to my mind, can these bones live? If you had seen Beth laying on this bed, she had been being fed intravenously for probably 3 weeks by this point. She was a bag of bones. That's all that was laying there. She was a bag of bones and sores and throwing up till there was nothing to throw up. There was no food going. She had no food, yet she would lay there and heave and heave. She was in such intense pain as a 12-year-old girl. They gave her her own morphine pump so that every 6 minutes she could give herself a shot of morphine. Now, when a doctor gives a 12-year-old child a morphine pump, it'll give you the idea of the intense pain. And Beth would sometimes wait, because she knew if she waited for 12 minutes, she could press it twice and get some relief, because one wasn't enough to give her relief. And I looked at her and I thought, how can this child live?
When was it right within this same period of time, Beth, that the Lord Jesus came to you in a special way? And who was in the room with you?
It was just my mom. She was in the room beside me
Nice and clear.
as she was every day. I wouldn't talk to anyone. I would not look at doctors. I would, for example, my psychiatrist, she'd come in and she'd want me to tell me my problems. And I said, I don't have no problems. She said, well, then tell me your mom's problems. I said, she doesn't have no problems. If she does, she tells them to my dad. And so she said, well, then tell me your dad's problems. I'm like, my dad doesn't have no problems. And she sent my mom out of the room to talk to me. And I said, and get my mom in here now. I was very rude to her. And she said, it's okay. Oh, I'll go get your mom. I'm like, now, go get my mom now. I would not talk. And I knew she hated soap operas, and I didn't like soap operas either. And so to get her to quit talking to me and to tell my problems, I'd click on the TV and watch soap operas until she finally got my mom in. And then she'd leave, and I'd turn it off, and my mom would be fine. And they'd had psychiatrists were done, and my mom was there. And we had just finished watching a Ron Peterson video he was up in Edmonton, and they sent down the video. And we had just finished watching it when my mom was getting ready to leave to go back to the Ronald McDonald House. And I just began to feel a real peace, and the entire room went like a kind of a hazy white and milky white color, and I just felt like completely at rest, like I was totally like floating almost. And I looked up like this, like just kind of lazily, and then I looked up and it was all hazy, and then I looked and I felt somebody walking like this, right at the edge of my bed. If my bed's right here, I felt somebody walking right here, just along right here. And it was
past the end of your bed?
Yep, come right here on this side. My mom was right here in the chair, and come right here. And then I felt myself sit up within myself. And
did he not put his arm around your shoulders? It's very important.
And he put, before I sat up within myself, he came around and he stuck his arm right here. It didn't indent the pillow, and you felt this arm come around right here. And then he took my arm, my hand, and I sat up within myself and turned over on the bed. And I looked up. I felt it here and watched it up there. I was wearing white up there, and I had curly brown hair. And down here, where I was wearing a red t-shirt, and I was bald. I looked up, and I was sitting on the bed, and I was looking up at him, and we were smiling at each other. And I did not see his face. I know it was Christ, though. I saw from about here and the back side. I did not see here. His hair was down to more here, and he was wearing all white, and he took my hand, and I felt it here, him take my hand, and we began to walk, just us two, away and around. And I watched us up there. He took my hand here, and we began to walk away, and I was looking up at him, and we were smiling, and we began to just walk away. And my mom grabbed me, and she shook me. Beth, are you all right? And I kind of turned over to her, because it was just so thick and so heavy. I could barely talk. It was just so, like...
The atmosphere, the presence?
It was just so completely... I can't describe it. She touched me and shook me and said, are you all right? I'm like, and I just kind of looked over and said, I'm fine. And then I looked back, and it was kind of going away. And then the nurse came in, and she looked at me and kind of just looked around and said, Beth, are you okay? And I just kind of looked at her, and I'm like, I'm all right. Because it was so thick that I could barely move my mouth. I could barely talk. It was just, the presence was just so thick. And then when I went and looked up, it would all just begin to slowly fade, and then everything was just normal.
What was it that made you shake her, Hetty?
She was laying there in the bed, and she says, Mom, something's happening.
Oh.
I didn't pay much attention. I was reading. And she said it again. Then I looked at her. The look on her face, I knew something was happening, but I didn't know what it was. I thought
You didn't know what she was experiencing?
No. I thought she was dying.
Right. And the nurse came in just then?
It was a bit, I got very panicky. I said, Beth, I got very loud. I said, Beth, please talk to me. She wouldn't talk to me. And then she didn't even know I was there. she later told me she didn't hear me try to get
I
her
never
to talk
heard her
to me.
once even talk.
She didn't hear me. When I finally grabbed her, she doesn't remember. She says, "Mom, I don't want to talk." She said it really quiet. She says, "But talk to me." I said it really, I don't want to say it like this here. But I was very scared. Because that was probably the worst
And I
week.
guess the reason she didn't want to speak at that moment is she was in some special, very sacred, wonderful place. I suppose at that very verge, at that very critical spot of crossing over to another dimension that we all know about. And then, Beth, you said that you only could see from here of him back. But I believe as you were speaking to me earlier, you said he turned a little bit, and you saw him a little more clearly.
It was just, I didn't see the front of him, but when we were walking away and he looked down at me and he was holding me here, I just saw more this way here, more of a, kind of more of a side, more profile, but I never saw the front of his face.
Did you have any particular feeling at that time?
It was just overwhelming peace. The presence was just so thick. I can't explain the emotion. It's just, it felt heavy, but it didn't. It felt light. It felt,
Felt wonderful.
yes, it felt extremely, if I could give it to you, I would, but I can't. And you know what I'm trying to say. It is something that now if I'm going through something and I do get depressed, I can look back then and know that he's got me through that. He'll get me through this, and this is nothing compared to what that was.
Absolutely. And then what happened now physically? There was something because you left us, Brother Kim, with 0, 0, 0, 0, and it wasn't catching. Just was it about this time that this miracle took place?
Was 0, 0, 0. When this experience took place, it was so detectable in the room. The nurse walked in the room. She stopped. She said, "What's going on in this room?" The very next test they took of Beth, she had 0.3 was her white cell count, which is very little, but it's a long way from 0. It meant that there was life. It was like the cloud the size of a man's fist.
Right.
And there was a slight detection. And so then the next day, they explained, well, you know, we don't know for sure. It looks like it's working. We don't know how it could be working after all this time, but it looks like something's happening. And then the next day when she was tested, the very next day, it had dropped back to almost to 0 again.
Yeah, the nurse said 7. I said, "Can you check that out? Because I saw some numbers there where it's normally 0. And she said, sure. And she never did. And then I said again, "Can you check?" And she said, "It's probably just, you know, from your blood. When we give you new blood, your counts will go up and it just will go through a quick phase and a burst and then it will go down." She said, "It's probably all it is." And that was all she said. But I said, "Will you check into it?" She's like, "Sure, I'll check into it."
And because they weren't expecting anything. You know, they weren't expecting it to ever come up. So the next day, it was almost at 0 again. And it was almost like, at that point, almost like a test. You know, we had seen a little bit of something, and then it dropped off. And then the next day, her blood count started to rise, and it came in a line that went just like this. They told us that it would take 6 months for her blood counts to recover. This was on Thursday. We saw evidence. On Sunday night, after them telling us, you know, after they started this, he said something. He said, "Well, we don't understand why so long, but it looks like it's going to work. Over, 3 to 4 weeks from now, we'll be able to let her have a pass and get out overnight once in a while. And over 6 months, this will all recover." That was on Thursday. On Sunday night, they discharged her from the hospital with a full white cell, red cell, and platelet count.
Praise God.
he had come in, and the nurse didn't come back and tell me the results. He came in, and I said, so what's happened? And he was, if you do see the picture of him up there, he's a doctor that you would not think's a doctor, and he was completely comical. He'd walk into your room talking like Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, and to check if you had GVH on the bottom of your foot, he'd pick up your foot, rip up your sock, and pick up your toe and go, no, you're okay, and drop it, like completely casual, like no doctor at all. And he walked in, he said, yeah, she's producing, and then walked out.
There's another a doctor that was her doctor, and now because she's 18, she was to have another doctor. I want this audience and the viewing audience to hear what that doctor said. I believe she's an Egyptian doctor, a woman, and we need to hear that.
She told Beth was to see her for her last appointment recently, and she asked Beth, what are you going to do with your life? And Beth said, well, I think I'm going to go to university, I'm going to do this or that. And she said, why would you do that? She says, I trained for 20 years, and I've been doctoring for all these years, wanting to see a miracle. She said, you are a miracle. You need to go and tell the world about it. That's what you need to do with your life.
She said it'd be a dishonor if you did not tell for the rest of your life to tell what God has done.
When I heard you, Brother Kim, and Sister Beth tell me that, I thought, that doctor's right. That doctor waited for 20 years to see a miracle. She said, I now have seen a miracle, and you need to spend the rest of your life telling this miracle. And I thought that this would be a good beginning. And we are going to tell this miracle, because this video is going to go around the world, and the Lord willing, we'll put this testimony also on the internet. And I think that everyone here feels real privileged that we were able to have this interview and testimony tonight. Are we all happy? Amen. The National Cancer Institute statistics indicated that Beth stood no chance of survival. In the unlikely event of her surviving, the physical effects resulting from full body radiation were expected to be organ damage to the heart, lungs, kidneys, liver, and brain, thyroid damage, lymphoma, bladder tumors, seizures, tumors and central nervous system damage, cataracts, chronic headaches, and complete dental failure. However, the morning of Beth's marrow transplant, God spoke a scripture to her mother. It shall be health to thy navel and marrow to thy bones. Proverbs 3 and 8. Over the past few years, Beth has undergone a battery of tests and examinations by medical specialists in every field. As a marvelous testimony to God's complete work of healing in her body, echocardiograms reveal a perfectly healthy heart. Her lungs are normal. Her thyroid, liver, and brain are in perfect condition. Her eye tests reveal 20/20 vision. She has never had a cavity in her teeth. Her doctor summed all this up by saying, all examinations demonstrate a healthy state and reveal a well-looking young woman. They said she would not live past 8 years old. However, Beth graduated from high school this year and looks forward to a bright future, telling the world what great things God did for her. To God.